Tessa from Mama's Geeky here. Thank you so much for stopping by my YouTube channel. My question is, when you were creating this, was there a lot of any challenges because of the pandemic? And I guess this goes to all of you.
I think that the pandemic didn't hit us until March. We were only 2 weeks away from finishing the final episode of 10, which was the most climactic part. So we were out of town, but other than that, coming back, we were one of the first on the lot. I think actually weren't we the only people on the lot when we came back all alone?
We were
wandering around being tested every 5 minutes. I got tested 5 days a week, twice on Wednesdays. And so we were trying to figure out how to work under those conditions, and ultimately it worked out pretty well. It's a pain, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I think it turned out well. I know I can speak to the visual effects. Is that when we got shut down, when the pandemic hit in March, I guess, right, is when that happened. Well, all of our visual effects teams still had to continue producing work. And so what happened is a lot of the studios shut down and had to migrate their artists home, sending keyboards, monitors, figuring out a way to work remotely so that the show could keep going behind the scenes. And so visual effects has been a little bit ahead of the curve because people are working all over the world now, and you don't even know where a studio is established. It's sometimes, you've got Method Vancouver, Montreal, LA, New York, and we're working with them. So all of our artists became very virtual over the pandemic. So in addition to shooting, it was that kind of behind the scenes of migrating everybody into a new way of working and doing reviews. But we only had a couple weeks of downtime with most of our teams, and we kind of came roaring right back with amazing technology and support teams around the globe, really.
Yeah.
I think
go ahead.
Our biggest limitation is we work on a 60-foot square soundstage to mix the show, and you can't bring that home. And Vince has a really fantastic home studio. I have a moderately good home studio, but we all kind of had to figure out a new game plan, and it was definitely complex. It's an Atmos show. It's not a 5.1 show, so there's a lot more complexity to the sonic environment and the channels used. And we really, at the time that we shut down, we really could not have done this show at home. And it was good that the timing worked out, that the last 2 episodes we were able to be back into the studio to do the show. Another show that we work on, Vince actually did have to finish at home. And it was... it definitely worked, but also definitely hard.
I was also going to say that when we came back to finish up those last episodes in the fall, it was definitely a whole different ball game. As far as, we had to make appointments to go to the rental houses. Only so many people were allowed. Taking clothes out and returning them, and the whole dry cleaning situation was a huge, huge deal. And also already by that time, Amazon had gotten and not just Amazon, but all of the retail online stores were at least a week behind. So when we used to be able to get something like the next day or within a couple of days, we really had to think ahead if we needed to order anything online, because it was all taking at least a week.
Yeah.
But I'm really interested in how you created these astronaut suits, because they look like, I feel like they're real astronauts. Well,
I have to be honest and say that the actual spacesuits from season 1 and 2 came from a third-party vendor, Global Effects, and they are a specialist in spacesuits and actually send their techs along with the spacesuits. Because when you put a spacesuit on, it's not like a regular costume. It's literally like the actor or the stunt person is putting on a machine, because it has to protect you from the elements. It also has to have a breathing apparatus. It has to have a cooling apparatus. So they're incredibly heavy, very stiff, and hard to move around, and they break down a lot. So we constantly had a lot. So we constantly had techs from Global Effects working with us on set, getting them in and out of the suits and maintaining the suits as we went along. And we had a lot of switching out between the actors and stunts, and also for visual effects for Jay, we were changing lenses and visors a lot. So that was very helpful. But I think going into third season, there are new spacesuits being made. So that's going to be really interesting for everybody.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thank you.
What was the biggest challenge in reproducing the customs to balance between the two words in the show?
Well, first of all, I had kind of two different teams working all the time. I had a civilian period costume team working, and then I had a space and military team working. And what I basically did from the beginning is I talked with Ron about having different color palettes for the NASA world versus the world of the astronauts and their families, you know, out at the outposts and things like that. So we went with a cooler, more kind of clinical color palette, sleeker, for NASA, blues, grays, forest greens, things like that, a lot of black and gray. And then we went with a much warmer color palette for the astronauts and their families, all earth tones, you know, browns, yellows, oranges, lime greens. And so that I felt like really separated the worlds and gave you the idea that NASA has its own kind of feeling to it. And I felt like it worked pretty well. And I think Ron was pretty happy with it.
Thank you.
What effects challenges did you face in the Apollo-Soyuz space docking, and also the challenges on the moon shuttle sequences where you had a lot of motion on the moon, vehicles on the moon?
Well, this was a kind of a combination between myself and the magnificent Jay Red that we had to put together a lot of these things. We had Todd Schneider, our stunt coordinator. We shot various things, and of course Jay made it bigger and better. We dealt with this off speed. That was one of the things that we dealt with. We had to find out what frame rate we liked on the moon, and that turned out to be 32 frames per second, pretty much. And then Todd took care of the wire work, which then allowed the people to move around in a very, you know, moon-like way. And is that the question you're asking?
Yeah, in particular, especially the motion that you had these space vehicles moving across the moon's surface, and you had the astronauts hanging on outside, which you've got motion of the astronauts hanging outside, and you've got the motion of the vehicle moving across the surface of the moon. Did that present a unique challenge?
Well, yeah, I mean, we didn't have that much room to move, so we drove it as far as we could, and then we just then Jay just continued it. I did not shoot the men on the outside of the rover. Did you? That was all CG, right?
Yeah, so there's actually the Marines. There's a couple of vehicles. We had the rovers, of course, which we shot a combination of real live action of multi-person rovers moving across, 50, 70 feet. And then we had big aerial shots that were actually CG, that were, a combination of live action and CG. But then we have the LSAM, which is actually flying across the surface of the moon with the Marines on the back. Yeah. We actually shot some with real Marines on close-ups. When you see faces and you kind of pull back away, we're replacing the entire background. So it's an illusion, right? As you're filming with a crane and having people on the back of that thing and then pulling away, but we're replacing all of the background to make it look like you're traveling. So it's a big illusion. When you see the stage photography, it looks kind of ridiculous, actually, because you're just photographing people standing on a platform. But then we also had a mixture of full CG Marines on the back of the LSAM as well. So it was taking cues off Stephen and Ross's lighting, and then we matched that with our artists using computers to do the other ones.
Did you guys storyboard those scenes?
Yes.
Often. Yeah, we would often storyboard, and then we would go into previs as well, right? Which is kind of a rough kind of video game style visualization of what we ultimately wanted the shots to be.
Cool. Very good. Thank you.
Being that this is an alternate history and not recreating something that actually happened, it's a mixture of history and alt history. Speak to the freedoms you had, like even in like fashion, special effects, and even sounds, that you could create something that was unique to this show and not be kind of trapped in the historical perspective of it.
Wow. That's a tough question. I think we did what we needed to do within the story and the spirit of the scene. We were also pulled back quite often about that wouldn't be this way and that wouldn't be that way. But I don't think we really had too many restrictions other than architecture and certain elements of technology that would not have been there, because we're sticking with the reality of a 85, even though we're on the moon. We're just taking our technology from that time and putting it on the moon, and then just taking the license of saying, well, we got all kinds of gizmos in there that allow us to do that we didn't have, but we still have we still don't have a laptop computer that, so that's it's kind of a gray area, and they take advantage of that.
And we talk about everything, don't we? Almost like we talk about all the details, and everything is a choice. Nothing shows up on screen accidentally, like, oops, we didn't think about that. It's like everything gets discussed. I mean, I'll say from a visual effects standpoint, like, we start with the rules and then we bend and break them kind of where we need to, but it's always great to have a technical and a reality foundation. Then we can say, well, maybe the sun's a little higher just because it looks better.
That's right.
Right. Or we're going to film a part of the ship that you could never get to historically, but let's show this and maybe play with physics a little bit to really bring the drama out in something.
And sometimes the situation gets a little bit strange, I guess, but I'll choose a light. I'll say, listen, I'd like to put this light or have this light in the scene. And then I'm told, well, that's really not part of the time frame, but we're on the moon. So you go, okay, well, so we have to follow a certain, we're following a certain path of reality in our world that we remember in the 80s or whatever, but we're taking it and putting it into an expanded universe, which seemingly it works. It gives it an odd feel. So I think that's a good thing.
One of the fun things about sound is that, we have records of what a lot of these things look like, right? We don't have really any good records of what they sounded like, that isn't coming through, radio hash on communication. So we really had to build everything from scratch, and it began with Vince and Karen, our wonderful effects editor, sort of talking about what are the technical things that need to happen, say we're in Jamestown or, we're in some other environment. What do they need? They need air, they need power, there's the shot going through the lab where Tracy kind of first discovers that there's, a lab and potentially alcohol. We have centrifuges and other lab equipment playing that we use later on throughout the show to kind of give more texture to Jamestown. But all of that has to be built based on a conversation of, what do they need? What are we going to hear? Because none of it exists. The set itself is as silent as we can make it. And then, kind of a smaller point of that, which I think is a lot of fun, is the interplay between flight control and DODCOM. The idea is that in the defense control space that we kind of move off to the side every once in a while into, all the equipment that's in flight control has got to get wedged into this closet. And it's kind of your standard military solution of, well, give us everything. We'll figure out a broom closet to stick it into and a guy to manage it, and it'll be fine. And And so we get to play that sort of interplay of, okay, now this 80-foot space is wedged into a broom closet. And maybe there's some other communications equipment that we're not supposed to know about whizzing away, but we don't really care about those guys hearing. So it's fine. We'll just, it's going to be loud. It's going to be hot. It's going to work.
Thank you so much to all of my monetary supporters, my members here on YouTube, as well as my patrons. If you haven't joined yet, please consider doing so. We have some really awesome perks, including a monthly Zoom meeting where we get to talk face to face. Thank you again to everyone who supports me.